Welcome to Mind of the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue. In Mind of the Forest, we talk about forestry, the importance of managed forests, and the many aspects about the forest products industry. Forest landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers such as lumber, paper, and pellet mills all play an important role in the conservation and management of forests for the important renewable natural resource it is. Managed forests offer more for wildlife, water protection, and clean air, so the LFA advocates to keep forests as forests. This episode of Mind of the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, you have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. This is episode 47, where we talk with Dr. Rich Vlosky, who is a professor with the LSU Ag Center in Baton Rouge. Dr. Vlosky performs studies about various forest products, which is the topic of the discussion for today. We have with us today Dr. Rich Vlosky. He is the director and Crosby Land and Resources Endowed Professor of Forest Sector Business Development at the Louisiana Forest Products Development Center at LSU School of Renewable Natural Resources. I needed two breaths to say that, Rich. So glad to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, your background a little bit. I want you to tell us more about it, but you have a bachelor's from Colorado State and at Fort Collins in Natural Resources Management with a concentration in forest management, master's from the University of Washington in Seattle in Forest Products Economic and International Trade, and a PhD from Pennsylvania State University, University Park in Wood Products Marketing. And according to the website at LSU, your research interests are, it's kind of like you're setting up a dating site. No, I'm kidding. According to the title, is domestic and international wood products marketing, e-business, e-commerce, technology applications to improve wood products business competitiveness, marketing applications to economic development. I don't know if I typed that.
Marketing
okay.
Applications.
Marketing, okay. Environmental certification and marketing, value-added product opportunities, and international forest sector-based economic development. That's a long list, Rich.
Yeah, interests have come and gone over the years, depending upon where the industry has been.
Yeah.
In the early part of my career, I worked for Plum Creek Timber Company before I went on for my PhD, and we were the first company in the country, if not the world, to apply barcodes to a piece of lumber in the production line. Now, that was before UPC codes existed at all on any wood product. So today, of course, everything from a dowel to a piece of OSB sheet or plywood, everything has a barcode. So I moved on from that research into some things that were more important to study and where there were funds.
Okay.
Because everything we do is funded from outside sources.
Well, let's back up just a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Rich. Where are you from and how'd you get to Louisiana eventually?
Well, I grew up in a town called Pearl River, New York. Not Louisiana.
Okay.
And that's about 20 miles north of New York City. So it was very rural, but you could be in New York City in a half an hour. It was a very interesting place to grow up. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of my childhood in the woods, very close to our house. And I was a trapper. I like to say I put myself through middle school by trapping.
Really?
And yeah, it was very, very nice childhood growing up in a very rural area. So I've always been interested in trees and forests, and that's I left home at 17 to go to university in the state at the State University of New York in Oswego, and then some friends said, you got to come out to Colorado. This is where it's happening. So I took their advice, hopped in a car, and drove to Colorado and continued my studies there.
That's a fur piece.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, from almost all the way out to the West Coast. I mean, that had to be a strange cultural shock to you at first. Huh?
It was actually, culturally, it really wasn't that shocking or that different. It was, but the scenery and the geography, of course, is magnificent. Mm-hmm. And going to Colorado State University offered me the opportunity to spend a lot of time hiking and climbing 14,000-foot peaks. I think I probably climbed about 10 of those peaks in Colorado. Wow. Not technical climbing, just scrambling up the rocks and nearly killing myself a number of times, sliding down snow fields.
Oh, gosh.
And, that really pegged it for me that was what I wanted to do.
Cool.
Was to spend time in the woods as a forester. Then I realized as I was getting older that I probably couldn't run around the woods at 50 as I could at 25.
That stands to reason.
So I moved into the economics and business side of things at the University of Washington. And then I did a summer internship with Plum Creek Timber Company in downtown Seattle at that time. And spent a lot of time working in industry. About 10 years between Plum Creek Timber Company and other companies as well.
So Plum Creek got you to Louisiana?
No, actually, I went back for my PhD at Penn State, and then there were 3 jobs available in academia at the time that I graduated. And there were 3 of us, PhD graduates, in the country. We all knew each other. Graduating at the same time. So we all interviewed at the same places. And I ended up in Louisiana. So since 1994, I've been here at LSU.
Well, welcome on your 30th anniversary.
It is
here
my
in Louisiana.
30th anniversary last month.
Well, congratulations. We're glad to have you here. We always have good conversations with you. You've been part of LFA through LSU for a long time now.
Well, it's great to be here. I've met a lot of great people, and do my best to help out in the state in any way I can.
Well, good. Well, tell us a little bit about what you do at LSU. What I know we talked about a lot of subjects and interests and things of that nature, but what actually do you do for LSU?
Well, in my younger days, I was a forester, and I measured trees like foresters do. But these days, and for the last 30 years, I measure people and companies, ideas, perceptions about business or about how they interact with wood products. So I am a social scientist, and my colleagues, some say you should have been over in sociology, but I specialize in anything that has to do with the wood products industry. So I have conducted hundreds of surveys, which is my primary mode of gathering research nationally, statewide, internationally, to consumers, to home builders, to big box building products sellers like Home Depot and Lowe's, also architects, builders, just about anybody in the supply chain that has to do with wood. I've done research on the logging industry, the forest landowner sector, all products at mills that we have here and around the country, like plywood or oriented strand board, or laminated veneer lumber, which is actually a mass timber product. Lumber itself, right, for building and for decorative purposes. And furniture, and anything that has to do with wood in the supply chain.
Just kind of curious. I know a lot of people see surveys everywhere. It pops up on your phone, on your website, on a website that you might be looking at. Do you find it difficult to get response from some surveys? And is it more difficult now than maybe 20, 30 years ago?
That's a very good question. And of course, we have to have a high enough response rate for the surveys that myself and my colleagues do. And before the internet really was a thing, we would rely wholly on mail surveys, which actually have a higher response rate if we jump to today than e-based or internet-based surveys for many sectors, because we're flooded with all sorts of stuff in our inboxes every day. A lot of it goes directly to your spam folder if it's set up properly. A lot of it's junk. And people are pretty hesitant to take a look at a survey and actually spend time doing it, let alone clicking on the link.
Yeah, I can imagine that we get so many emails. Oh, click here for this. And I know all of us here, we're apprehensive to click on any link that we get
in an
email,
smart,
even from someone I think I know that, it might be. I've got an email from Buck, my boss, and it's really not from Buck. So yeah, I can imagine people are generally more cautious now.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Jeff. I got an email from LSU campus, A&M campus. Just to digress a second, I work for the Louisiana State University Ag Center, Agricultural Center, which is a separate unit in the LSU system.
Okay.
So I got an email from LSU IT, and it looked very squirrely. So I contacted our IT COO, or Chief Technology Officer, and he said it looked suspect. So I had to contact LSU to see if it was real. It happened to be real, but it looked, it could have been problematic. You click on those, and the next thing you know, you don't have a computer working anymore.
Yeah.
So getting back to your question about survey responses, I prefer, depending upon what the client wants to do, because I've worked for 110 different funding entities in the last 30 years. And some want to do e-based or web-based surveys. I like to do paper-based surveys. They're a pain in the neck to do because you have to hand stuff envelopes and keep track of who has responded, because each survey is numbered, so we know who they are. We have some information about those companies or people who live in different parts of the country ahead of time, so we can match that up and do some statistical analysis later. So with survey work, I always send out a pre-notification email or a postcard saying in a week you're going to get a survey from me, and it has all my contact information. A week later, the survey goes out. A week after that, another postcard goes out, says, last week, you should have received a survey. Fill it out, please. And then I wait a few weeks and do a second mailing to everybody who didn't respond the first time.
Is that a second mailing of the
survey itself? And they all come with postage paid return envelopes.
Yeah.
And response rates have been all over the map. Industry is typically cautious, and response rates are lower for industry as opposed to populations, citizens who live in different parts of the country, around mills or in urban areas, let's say.
Why do you think that is for business? Are they just more cautious in what they do, or is it something that they don't want to they don't want to spend the time to do it?
Well, you have to find the right person in a company who is not only the correct person with the knowledge to fill out the survey, but also somebody who has the authority to fill out a survey. And oftentimes, when we buy lists, which we do from list companies who sell us lists by industry type, a good part of those are headquarters addresses, because we have to send to a mailing address, not a post office, not a physical address, rather.
Right.
So if we're looking at plant level information, I send the survey to each plant, each softwood lumber manufacturer, each building materials provider, each plywood manufacturer, etc. And hopefully the plant mill manager will pay attention to this and do the survey. And I always express how important it is, the opportunity for them to get industry competitive information, because that's my carrot. I offer them the results of the study. So I send it. That's the last step, is to send out the result of any study I do to the people that responded. We can't send money,
right?
And we can't give gifts. Your raffles for a prize. So that's my hook.
I would imagine some businesses would find that very interesting and helpful as far as their products are concerned.
I think that's probably the primary reason that they do respond. Some just want to help out. A researcher like myself or a graduate student, I always would state that this study is part of a graduate student's dissertation or thesis, and you would really be helping this person if you completed this so that they can have good information and graduate with a good thesis or dissertation.
Yeah. Well, that's true. A lot of folks in our industry, I think, would have more compassion for that approach.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes I beg.
Well, you do what you have to do, right?
You're right. In a few circumstances, I've had to send out a third mailing because the responses were too low. The response rate was too low for the first two. That is typical.
Yeah.
So I've had to do a third mailing for a few studies where I just didn't get enough data.
Yeah.
And if you don't have data, you can't do analysis.
So you send it to the ones on the list who are remaining who have not yet responded.
That is correct.
So hopefully it gets fewer and fewer.
Yeah, and we also get undeliverables, because the company has moved or they've changed their names, they've been bought by another company, which in the forest products industry happens fairly regularly with consolidations and, mergers.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about some of the products that you have, I guess, investigated or looked at.
Well, I've probably looked at just about every forest product that you could think of over my career. I've also done a lot of work in preservative treatments of wood. And in those types of studies, I've surveyed schools, elementary schools in the country, because they use that type of material for playground equipment. And do they know about wood? And what are their perceptions of preservative treated wood? So that's been a big, that was a huge part of what I was doing. Many studies on preservative treatments and mold, and trying to help out the treated wood, southern pine treated wood markets. Lately, the more exciting and new things that I've been studying are wood-based bioenergy. And before and as the pellet industry was growing, starting, and now evolving in the United States, I was on the front end of that with a couple of students to look at what was going on in this new industry and what the future might look like for the pellet industry in the U.S., manufacturing, usage, or where it's going, if it's being exported. Yeah.
Let's focus on that for just a little bit, because Louisiana does have Drax biomass, and they have two facilities, two mills in Louisiana right now. And they have their facility in Baton Rouge, where they store and then eventually, ship the pellets too. And I think don't they have a Mississippi
They do.
facility?
Gloucester.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So they have those facilities. They're routing it all through Baton Rouge. What's, as you see, what's the status of that industry right now? I know from our standpoint, having such a product available is good because it focuses on thinnings, which is something that is important to landowners in Louisiana, especially nowadays with you don't see another paper plant coming up,
Yeah.
paper mill, excuse me.
And I don't think you're going to see another paper mill being built from the ground up, probably in my lifetime, what's left of it.
Yeah.
Some paper mills, we're kind of off on a slight tangent here, but some paper mills have expanded their lines. They've converted to more specialty products. I wish I had invested in the corrugated paper or cardboard industry before Amazon became a thing.
Yeah.
Because those ancillary companies and products for something like Amazon, it kind of trickles down to support those industries. Pellets are interesting. We've been using pellets in this country for 50 years, but for home heating in the Northeast and the upper Midwest in the colder climates. So the volumes were low. Yeah, so there was a pellet industry for home use. Well, the pellet industry that we have today, 95% of all pellet production in the country goes offshore. It's exported to either Asia or first it was all exported to the UK and other countries in the EU, European Union. And in the last 5 to 8 years to 10 years maybe, markets have opened up and have been expanded to Vietnam, to Malaysia as a production or as a consumption country. Japan is building, as we speak, another bio-based, pellet-based power plant. So from the West Coast, we're exporting to those types of countries.
Is Japan's look toward pellets now a product of Fukushima, you think?
I think that may have something to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
They're very much into nuclear power, and this Fukushima was a complete unforeseen but huge environmental disaster.
Yeah.
And they're still trying to figure out how to remove that radioactive material that is still in that plant.
Wow.
If they send robots in to take pictures of these these kind of formations that have remained made out of molten fuel rods.
Really?
Yeah. It's scary and interesting.
Yeah, I guess with Chernobyl back in the 80s, it shouldn't be any surprise to think that. I guess it's just something, it's not a topic that's discussed a lot, and it doesn't come up very often. So
But it's coming up more and more as we look for alternatives to fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And if nuclear is safe, if it's made safer than it is today, let's say, I think personally that we're going to see more nuclear power generated around the world and even in the United States.
Interesting. Well, you don't really hear much about new power plants, at least in Louisiana, coming up. I know there's the nuclear power plant down south in Taft, Louisiana. There's one near
St. Francisville.
Yeah. So I know those two. Most everything else, because Louisiana has so much natural gas, have been natural gas powered facilities, correct?
Yeah, or petroleum oil-based.
Okay.
So that's a good point, because we have so much availability every day that's growing, access to fossil fuels, particularly a cleaner burning fuel like liquid natural gas. We're not going to see a transition away from fossil fuels in Louisiana,
yeah.
frankly, or in the country for
Really?
decades.
Really?
Now, we're going to move the needle, but fossil fuels in some form are going to be, I believe, the major source of energy, electricity, and other power sources, other power needs in the U.S. Now, hydro is a factor in some parts of the country. Wind is in its fledgling state, and we're still keeping an eye on wind power as a possibility of really taking on some of the power load or power needs for the country. Wind farms out in the Gulf, wind farms out in the Atlantic Ocean. If you go out towards the west, you'll see the plains full of windmills, wind farms.
Kind of got out in the weeds with power and all
We
that,
did.
but
So pellets.
let's
right now.
back to pellets. But so they're using residuals and they're using pulpwood to create pellets that are being exported.
That is correct.
It does sound like a good thing overall.
It's an interesting industry. When it first began to become a thing, to have a presence in the U.S., and then we're talking the U.S. South is where this is happening.
Yeah.
It was heavily subsidized, both on the buy side and the sell side. So our Louisiana economic development, just as an example, Mississippi economic development provides all sorts of incentives for really any manufacturing firm that wants to site a plant. There's jobs creation incentives. There's subsidies for creation of new jobs, for utilization of whatever resources around it. And on the other side of the pond, there were many countries that had very generous incentives and subsidies to convert to bio-based energy. The Europeans have been much more conscious of the environment and the need to take better care of and maintain the environment that we have. It's just a fact. So we've been kind of a laggard, a follower in that whole kind of mentality and philosophy. So that kind of led to those subsidies and incentives, which were very, very generous in the Netherlands, in the UK, and other countries. And when I first began studying this and talking to folks all around the world about where it was going, those subsidies were in place. Now, over the years, they were declining. So as they changed the rules, companies no longer had that cushion. Drax and Viva, any company really that was selling into the European market. And I'm not sure what the situation is in the Asian market right now with regard to subsidies and incentives. So as the subsidies and incentives were reduced, then of course that affected the bottom line for these companies. So they had to make some changes in this changing environment.
Seems like it's, well, I guess with anything in business and government, when they get those things evolve over the years, that incentives now may not be incentives in the future, is what you're giving an example with Europe right now.
Yes.
So that's with any industry. So they are going through their transitions now as those subsidies are reduced.
Yeah, and some of those subsidies were pretty major.
Yeah.
And, I keep track of the latest news and these types of influences that these different sectors, like the pellet sector.
Do you have a gauge as to how it has affected the pellet industry?
It's affected the bottom line, so the profit margin has been reduced. So that's an evolution that any company that faces these kinds of declines in subsidies or incentives has to face, and I'm sure they've planned for this over time, and so that's really the main effect. And so pellets are interesting because we would use cellulosic material, wood, thinnings, and other small diameter trees, pulpwood. And then they bring it to a plant and they grind it into a very fine powder, compress it into pellets, put it on a truck or a rail, and in our case, bring it to the port of Baton Rouge, where Drax has a facility for storage and inventorying their pellets. Mm-hmm. And then they pop it onto a ship through a conveyor belt from those storage units. They're huge domes. If you are from Louisiana or you come across the Mississippi River Bridge, you'll see these two huge domes, which are Drax pellet storage facilities.
It'll be on the north side of the I-10 bridge, just in case.
Yes. And as I was driving in today to Alexandria, I noticed that some of the roof material has come off. Oh. And I don't know what that was from, wind or age, but so now they're not completely white anymore. Well, I kind of one isn't.
The recent storm was at Francine that came through. I wonder if that had anything to do with it.
Could be. But that's just an aside. So then they put these pellets on a ship and 50,000 tons at a time, and off it goes to Europe. And then it gets offloaded. And Drax itself provides about 5 to 8% of power used in the UK. So they are involved in this entire supply chain from the tree to the energy generation in the UK. So pellets come off the boat, go on another rail, car or truck, generally rail, off to the energy burning unit, transitioning from coal to pellets, and they pulverize it again back down to its original component, fine-grained, sort of like sand dust, and then they burn it.
So does Drax, I don't think they use all the pellets themselves, don't they? They provide pellets to other energy companies?
Yes, they do. Yeah, to other countries, for sure. But they do provide quite a bit of, a very healthy percentage of the pellets that are used in the UK and other countries along in the EU. So they're a huge player. And Viva is another huge player, the largest pellet producer in the world.
Yeah, they've had a bit of a black eye of late, it seems.
Well, they've had a financial black eye. They've filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Yeah. Oh, they have. Okay. I knew they were in trouble. I didn't know if they had actually filed for bankruptcy yet. So
they did. But for the sake of the industry, and they're primarily located in the Atlantic seaboard region in the southern South Atlantic region. Mm-hmm. For the sake of the industry, wherever it may be, I hope they get back on their feet. I don't think that they've reduced production dramatically, so they're restructuring, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that they'll come out okay on the back end of this and still be a major player in the market.
What other products have you been studying over the last several years?
Well, the other major product that I've been looking at is cross-laminated timber, which is in the family of what we call mass timber. Okay. Now, mass timber has been around for quite a long time, and many people use the term cross-laminated timber and mass timber interchangeably. Okay. But cross-laminated timber, or CLT, is part of the family of mass timber products. Another example of a mass timber product that we've been using forever are glulam beams. When I went to school at the University of Washington, the building I was in had exposed glulam beams, and this was 38 years ago. Yeah. And still used today. We've got glulam plants in Louisiana. Some of the cross-laminated timber plants already had glulam facilities. So it's 2-inch, what we call dimension lumber, that can be edge glued and can be face glued into very large either columns or structural beams, and generally, if not always, exposed because it's really a nice product, and it wood lends a unique environment to work in, or to study in, or to be in. So glulam beams have been around for a long, long time. There's some other products that I won't go into detail about because they're not known to many people, frankly. But there's parallel strand lumber. There's laminated veneer lumber. There's doweled lumber. So there's those types of products that have been around.
So laminated veneers, that's kind of like the I-beams that Boise makes at their facility just north of Alexandria in Boise.
Yeah, laminated veneer lumber are used for the, not for the webbing, but for the top and bottom components of an I-joist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been around forever. I studied that years ago when it was just becoming a product. That has evolved into cross-laminated timber, which uses 2-inch lumber and lays it up similar to plywood in alternating directions. So, and there's no limit to the thickness of this product. It has to be dried to a particular moisture content. There's a particular density. And people are making enormous panels. There's no real limitation on width or length, except transportation probably. Yeah. Same with other mass timber products. And the fascinating thing about cross-laminated timber is that it is being used for construction in non-residential buildings across the U.S. today, maybe for the last 15 years, but it has been around in Europe for 25 years.
Really? Why so slow in the United States?
It's like any new product, Jeff. We had, particularly in the building side of things, one of the limiting factors that always needs to be addressed, first and foremost, are building codes. So if your building codes don't allow for wood structural members, or wood floors, or wood walls, or wood buildings, it's not going to happen. So we're seeing building codes changing by state. In the West Coast, they're years ahead of the rest of the country with regard to manufacturing and building, although that is spreading now across the U.S. Using these very interesting panels as a building material product.
I guess if you're saying you're not limiting in size, well, you're limiting in size only based on how you can transport it.
And press size as well, of course. But you can glue the members in cross-laminated timber end to end or side to side and face to face.
It seems like I remember reading something about the early development of plywood with southern yellow pine. Adhesives was a challenge when they were studying this and trying to get that right, because you're not using the Douglas fir out west, you're using southern yellow pine. Sometimes the adhesive has to be different. So is that something that they're trying to work out as well with CLT?
It's not a problem today, but early on, a building was built out in Oregon, and it delaminated the layers, the lamina. They delaminated, and it gave the cement and steel people were jumping up and down with joy, saying, "I told you so. This is a terrible product." Yeah. But they had to rebuild that, and they have the industry has refined the adhesives required for those types of products, and it's a no problem at this point in time. Okay. It's not a consideration.
So in business now, I guess a lot of it is dependent upon demand for such a product. And you and I have talked over the years, and I would love to see a CLT plant in Louisiana. I think that would be a tremendous advancement for the state. But if you don't have anybody to purchase that material, or at least in the region, because transportation is a problem.
Well, not only that, but there's, if I can just speak a bit to some of the advantages of cross-laminated timber.
Yeah, please.
The components for a building that's going to be made with cross-laminated timber, and it's often a hybrid with concrete, which there's a need for concrete in different applications in a building. But the unique thing about cross-laminated timber is that all of the components for a building are pre-made, prefabricated off-site by the CLT manufacturer or an intermediary. So when a building out in Oregon, there's half a dozen 10-story plus buildings that have been built with wood, with CLT, and it allows for all of the pre-cutting and the holes to be drilled off-site for wiring, for water lines, for whatever that you would find in a structure. So they're marked, and they are a computer generated model of that building is produced. And so components go to the site on the back of a truck. So, and every one of those members goes to a particular place in that building. So you can build a story of a building in 3 days.
Wow. With
cross-laminated timber, as they have in University of British Columbia was the first campus to use cross-laminated timber for dormitories for their students. And they were building a floor every 3 days, a 12-story building.
Wow.
Done in a couple of weeks. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I went to visit a site that was under construction, a 10-story building in Portland, Oregon, when I was at the Mass Timber Conference, which is held in Portland every year. And if you're interested in mass timber, that's the place to be. That is the most important and excellent conference. And we went to visit this site, and they had built out about 6 stories, and it was under construction. And what fascinated me was the waste pile of debris and waste from the site. If you go to a normal building site, they might have pods or these huge dumpsters that they'll haul away. This pile of waste was smaller than this office, so it was about 12 by 12 and maybe 3 feet high, and that was it.
Wow!
So
that's pretty impressive.
It's very impressive. Testing has been done, and standards have been met for fire codes, for earthquake resilience, for weather. The U.S. military is very interested in cross-laminated timber. They can pop up structures overseas quickly, take them down quickly, and it takes quite a lot of firepower to get through one of these walls manufactured with CLT. So at the Mass Timber Conference and other shows and exhibitions that I've been at, the U.S. military has a booth, a presence. It's very interesting application.
Sounds like you could set up in one place, and once that's done, tear it down and rebuild it in another place.
That's kind of the idea.
Really?
Yeah. And it's very structurally sound, and as I said, it's very resilient to weather.
Is
issues.
Cost a big factor?
Costs are actually very competitive now because more buildings are being built, more supply is being supplied, and different influencers. I've done a lot of work with perceptions of architects and engineers and non-residential builders regarding their willingness to use or spec CLT to their clients or for their building contractors. So it's, as you kind of alluded to earlier with supply and demand, it's evolving together. Those two those are the major components of an industry, supply and demand. So supply is increasing, demand is increasing, and so those are both very important factors in the growth of this industry.
You still have an issue with the building codes, as you talked about earlier.
You do.
That's not something I've heard a whole lot of local governments talking about as far as changing building codes for CLT.
Some states have already moved in that direction, municipalities, cities. There's an international uniform building code that my understanding is that allows for CLT. And if different entities or different geographic regions in the U.S. can adopt that building code, that CLT could be a possibility to use in construction.
In Louisiana, you think that would have to start out in the legislature, or would that kind of bubble up from local governments?
It probably, there's a building code association, a group in Louisiana that sets or discusses modifications to building codes. So I'm not really sure where that would originate from.
Yeah.
If it would be legislative or if it's outside the purview of government to initiate building code modifications to allow for this.
You mean state government as opposed to local?
Yes, state government. A number of universities have built campus buildings using cross-laminated timber. In Arkansas, that was the first, aside from the University of British Columbia, which I mentioned earlier, I don't know how many hundreds of square feet of dormitory space was built in Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas, very early on in this game, in this sector. And it's all built out of CLT. And they had to import the wood from Austria.
Oh, wow, man.
A building has gone up in Minneapolis.
As Arkansas has.
Yeah. Buildings have gone up recently in different states and in the cities that had to import CLT from Austria or other European, Scandinavian countries.
Wow.
Because of specifications. And like I said, they've been at it for a very, very long time. Western CLT manufacturers are fully engaged. So we'll be seeing, and we have seen, CLT buildings built in the South and in the West, or let's say in the East, that has been sourced with CLT made from Western sawmills, from Douglas fir. And you can make CLT with southern pine.
Well, I know you don't make the decisions, but it sure would be nice to see a CLT building on LSU's campus one day.
I can't talk about that. I've talked to some influencers at LSU, looking and hoping that can come to be, because other campuses, Clemson, they have a building and design center was headed up by one of the foremost CLT engineering people in the country, Dr. Pat Layton, and she retired recently, but she speaks everywhere, and she is so knowledgeable. So Clemson has a building. I believe UGA, Georgia, has a building. Yeah. Arkansas has residence halls. Heck, they built the new Portland Airport terminal out of wood.
Wow.
It is a magnificent piece of architecture.
Man.
It's gorgeous, and it's all CLT. There's over 1,000 buildings, some say 2,000 buildings that are made out of mass timber, of which I'm not sure a small component, a relatively small percentage, would be CLT as we know
CLT
it.
Specifically.
Specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
And to my mind, they're looking at building huge skyscrapers with this material. So we're up to 18 stories in Milwaukee, and they're going to be building that is the tallest, but they're going to be building even a taller one.
Really?
In the same city, out of cross-laminated timber. Wow. But I think the sweet spot for CLT is 3 to 4 story buildings, like residence halls on campuses, strip malls, types of construction. So smaller
Apartment
fewer
buildings, maybe?
Yeah, multifamily housing.
Yeah.
It's a project I'm working on right now with a federally funded grant, looking at different components of utilizing CLT from the forest to building low-income manufactured homes, multifamily homes in urban areas on the eastern seaboard. So the partners in this grant project, which has just kicked off, the major partner, one of the major partners is the U.S. Endowment for Forests and Communities. Another is the Southern Association of Cooperatives, which is a underserved, underrepresented forest landowner group, primarily Black African American forest landowners. The Emerson Group out west has put up half of the funding. It was a 1-to-1 match, and they have invested. It's an investment company, and they have invested a lot of money in building low-income housing already in suburban, or not suburban, but in urban Washington, D.C. So they've already have experience in doing that.
Wow.
So between the four of us, and I'm doing the market research, replicating a study I did in 2019. So between the four of us, I think we're going to make a difference, and that's our goal. And it's strictly limited to the South with regard to production.
We look forward to seeing the results of that study and see where that goes.
We're also looking at building a test CLT structure at LSU in conjunction with, it's called La House. It's an experiential house on campus that has the most current building and engineering components built into the house. It's an educational center run by a friend of mine, Dr. Carol Friedland. So she and I have been talking, and we'll have discussions with people in architecture and the building construction people on campus to see if we can't get some funding to put up a test home or even a home.
Yeah.
Because La House is a full-on structured house.
Really?
So the opportunities are there. In the South, there's only 2 CLT plants, one in Conway, Arkansas, and the other one in Dothan, Alabama. Oh. And that's it.
Wow.
Out west and in British Columbia, there's probably 10. And that is a limitation.
Yeah.
And once again, it's demand and supply. So we're still importing a lot of CLT from the West Coast, and even from European producers.
What other products are you looking at?
You know, frankly, those are the 2 that really are taking up the majority of my time.
Yeah.
That's what I have really been focusing on.
When we talk about demand in different areas of the country, is there development in the product, or maybe just a development in the awareness of opportunity for whomever would like to construct a multifamily structure or would have the building codes in place to have that structure?
It would be the latter.
The latter?
The construction methods are well established, and any improvements would be incremental and not really major leaps in innovation in construction of CLT panels. I may be wrong. I'm not an engineer,
right? But
my research has shown that only 4% of southern sawnwood producers have ever sold to a CLT plant, and I bet they've sold to glulam plants and not CLT plants. And only 20% were even aware that the CLT, what it was, or that that the market existed.
Wow.
And I looked at engineers and architects and builders, and a very small percentage were involved, have ever spec'd for architects, let's say. 20%, 10% have actually spec'd. And this was a study back in 2020. And it's being replicated right now. So we'll see what kind of growth is taking place in interest and acceptance, and what the concern, I've got a list of all the concerns and the barriers to entry and barriers to participation. And those all have to be ameliorated or excluded until this market can really take off. So you have to get architects and builders and engineers all on the same page, and then the softwood lumber producers in the South to be able to move this en masse forward to benefit southern states and potential manufacturers. This is where the action is. This is the most available and largest wood supply in the world.
So it would be rather difficult for me to go to an architect and say, hey, look, I want to build a house, but I want to build it out of CLT. Would he just likely to look at me like, what? And ask, what is that? Really?
Probably. We had an addition built on our house in Baton Rouge for my in-laws, and a large span had to be made for a 3-car carport. And my architect, good friend of our family, he was going to use a steel beam for that span. CLT wasn't around at the time, but I convinced him to use laminated veneer lumber as that component that spanned 3-car space carport. That's an example. He had no idea what I was talking about. Really? Even for laminated veneer lumber, which has been around for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So CLT is even further behind the curve, and it's top of mind for probably a half a dozen major architects in the country. There are some very well-known architectural firms that have taken the lead years ago in exploring and utilizing and specifying CLT for multi-story buildings.
Wow!
So they're really, really innovative and got ahead of this very quickly. Another benefit to cross-laminated timber is that it sequesters carbon. And that's a huge issue in today's world. Carbon sequestration, carbon capture. So sequestration of carbon in wood is just inherent. And that is something that doesn't occur with steel or concrete. It's gone through all the fire testing necessary to meet those standards. Concrete cracks, steel melts, wood chars. So if a house or a structure is burning, the cross-laminated timber wall and ceiling will only char about 1/4 of an inch in, and then it won't burn any further. So it is extraordinary in that respect.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
You go to YouTube and look at CLT fire testing.
Okay. So what about the insulation properties? It would seem that would be an advantage as well.
That's a good point.
I mean, I'm not sure. I'm just kind of guessing on that, but
intuitively, it would seem that it would be a good insulator if you have a 8-inch cross-laminated timber wall member. There are acoustics changes that occur when using cross-laminated timber, and that's one area that that is being worked on. And it sounds so negligible to us, but for office buildings, classrooms, and such, the acoustics and how it works with that type of surface.
Yeah,
if it's exposed, it typically would have gypsum board over it in a structure. It could have typical insulation board on the outer frame. So those types of products are still going to be used in many respects. Right. Other times it's going to be exposed, and it looks terrific. It's beautiful.
A lot of people put wood in their homes specifically for the aesthetics.
That's right.
So you'd have it built into the whole thing.
And studies have shown that people feel better, and they are more relaxed and more have a greater affinity with their environment in an office building or a classroom made of wood. It really makes a difference in psychologically in how people behave, and subconsciously or consciously.
So it's easier to chill in wood, I suppose.
That's a good tagline.
Well, okay. You can use it. No, I'm kidding.
Chill with wood.
What have we not talked about that would be of interest, I think, to our listeners?
Well, I think we've covered the two main areas of growth and opportunity, and particularly for forest landowners with pulpwood, it's such a miserably low price per ton.
It's a rough time right now.
I just heard $3-4 a ton, which sounds ridiculous. And I hope that's accurate because I heard that at the Louisiana Forestry Association meeting. So really, the forest landowners need outlets. And now we're back to pellets, need outlets for small diameter thinnings and pulpwood. So the pellet industry can help there. Government changes in government policy for fire, fuel loading removal, take out a lot of that small material as well. And CLT is I believe it's a terrific opportunity for softwood lumber manufacturers to pay attention to and become involved in.
Well, it's not just the landowners too; it's the loggers who have to do the expense of harvesting and getting it to a facility.
Right,
I mean,
and it's
all part of the economics of the industry, is it not?
It is. That's right. That's a very good point. Everybody in the supply chain, the logger, the forest landowner, has to deal with culling small diameter wood out of a forest or out of a tract or a logging show. We've seen some larger diameter wood being used for the pellet industry, and this has created a lot of angst and consternation with some environmental groups and people that think that, wow, they said they were only going to use pulpwood, or they were only going to use waste, post-harvest residuals and waste and trees and limbs. That was pretty much the story early on, but it became apparent that really wasn't going to work. So pulpwood, small diameter timber, trees, we're talking trees, are necessary feedstock for pellets. And even when we see larger diameter, up to 6 or 8 inches, trees, I've seen small decks of those types of diameter trees, and they are crooked and they are bent, and you cannot run that through a sawmill.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm personally, I don't know who's going to be listening here, but I'm not a proponent for using grade timber, and Brooks Mendel mentioned this. You're not going to use that and chip it for pellets. Right. So that doesn't make sense.
And that just goes with the best use of the resource.
Best and highest use.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
I just don't see grade wood being used for pellets, pulverizing it.
Well, hopefully we have a good future for CLT. It will be coming to Louisiana sometime.
I hope so. There are opportunities here, and there are a few perfect locations to place a CLT mill. But once again, as you mentioned, it's this interplay between supply and demand, and the influencers and the building codes. But Louisiana, for whatever reason, the actors who are involved and are decision makers really need to start paying attention.
Rich, if anybody would like to contact you, what is an email address that you'd like to give out?
We can use Vlosky. It's V as in Victor, L-O, S as in Sam, K-Y, at lsu.edu.
And we'll have that in the show notes too, so just in case you missed it on the air.
And that comes to my ag center. My ag center supervisors aren't going to be happy that I didn't give out my ag center email address. It's a very long address. This one is short and sweet, and we're all part of LSU.
Exactly. Rich Vlosky, Dr. Rich Vlosky, thanks so much for joining us.
All right, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Mind of the Forest. This episode was sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office, or you can find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry, the LFA and its programs, and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and the forest products industry in Louisiana, check out our website at laforestry.com. You can send comments or suggestions to me by email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's jzeringue @laforestry.com. You can also check out the show notes for our contact information, as well as the contact information of our guests in this episode. You can subscribe to Minding the Forest by clicking on the subscribe button or your favorite podcast app. Be sure to tap the notification button as well so you'll know when a new episode drops each month. Thank you for doing that. We do really appreciate that. And remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're minding the forest for you.